Hi everybody and welcome to Noor a Riyadh art program. I am Ahmed Mater and I will be your host for tonight's Noor Talk, one of the great events happening in the celebration of Noor Riyadh. Noor Riyadh is the new citywide festival of light and art that unites us, nurturing creativity, promote talent, and inspiring a new future and experiences. Riyadh Art mission is to transform the city into a gallery without walls. Themes of this first edition this year of Noor Riyadh is Under One Sky. And it's allude to togetherness, to the universal impulse to gather around light and to the flames and campfire and gaze at the stars. Today we are here to celebrate light together through one of the many appointments of the Noor Talks program. Through Noor Talks, we will have the opportunity to hear from the hands of artists and professionals and ideas, insights, research, and knowledge, and much more on the themes that related to the life. Please, if you want to listen to the talk, please return to the Riyadh Art YouTube homepage and select the video and the title of our talks. And also you can listen and watch by Arabic and English. Also, if you are following us on the YouTube, please feel free to post any question for our guests in the comment section. We will try to answer as many as possible in the light and as possible in the Q&A section at the end of the talk. Tonight, Noor Talk's title is A Journey to the Light and Darkness. And we will be delighted to welcome our guest. And I selected one quote that I try to find one quote tonight. And from the previous talks, I find one talk that I will start with. I am an artist. Political and religion divide us. I am an artist. Art can unite us in very unique way. I am an artist. So by Mr. Wilson, I think this quote was, for me, very interesting to start with. You are welcome. It's an honor for me to have you tonight here, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
And allow me to introduce with a brief introduction about Mr. Robert Wilson. He's an American experimental theater stage director and playwright who has been described by the New York Times a towering figure in the world of experimental theater and an explorer in the using of time and space on stage. He also worked as a choreographer, performer, painter, sculpture, video art, and sound and lighting designer. Since late 60s, Mr. Wilson shaped the look of theater and opera through his signature using of light, his investigation into the structure of the simple movement and the classical rigor of his scenic and furniture design. Wilson has continuously articulated the force and originality of his vision. Wilson close tie and collaboration with leading artists, writers, and musicians, continuing the fascinating audience worldwide. Welcome again, Mr. I hope we could have you in Riyadh, but thank you for the online to allow us to contact you tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So we are happy tonight with our audiences here and in Saudi Arabia and worldwide to listen to you. So allow me to introduce and leave the floor for you to start.
I grew up in a very small town in Texas and didn't have an opportunity to see galleries or museums or art theater or concerts, music. It was a rather conservative community. And it was not till I first came to New York that I become aware of a cultural and arts scene. I was immediately felt at home going to see dance events or going to a museum, and I was particularly attracted to the visual arts. I came to New York to study architecture, and I was in a 5-year course. And my first year, and in the first week of my schooling, an architect who is quite well known, spoke to us and said, students always start with light. Light is he quoted Einstein, is a measure of all things. And without light, there's no space. And that had a profound influence on me. And so from that day on, I always thought whether I was doing something architecturally or an exhibition or working in the theater, I started with light. And working in theater, I thought it was always strange that often a playwright would write a play, someone would cast it, and then someone would design the stage set and the costumes. And only in the final days or weeks did they do lighting. I start with light. Even before I know the contents of a work, I start with light and creating a space. And once I understand the space I'm in, it's easier for me to decide what to do. And you start with darkness. Can start with, this is a black object. So if I start with this and then I put a white object in front of it, the black will be blacker and the light will be lighter because of the darkness. I start with light, and in working on the Palace of Light for Riyadh, that's how I started. A concept of the moon. What could the moon be? It could be a spectrum of many different lights, of something that reflects. And the moon is of different hues of color, but it's mostly cooler. And then in opposition, I thought of the sun. The sun is usually we think of in terms of warm colors. It's the opposite. So every opposite needs its opposites. And so I started with these two ideas that were symbols of one thing. Like you have two hands, and these two hands are very different from one another. They have different functions, but it's one body. You have two sides to the brain, but it's one mind. So this idea of thinking of two is one. And in terms of the Salva Palace, I was thinking about eons of time ago when it was a body of water. It's a palace made of earth and water. So I started thinking of the different elements that make this palace a palace of light, of jewels, and different hues of color. And then I thought of sound to go with this installation of a palace of light. I was thinking that with the sun and moon symbols, that if we took the moon, a multifaceted mirrored disc made of metal, how this material that changes also in hues of colors could be a counterpoint to its environment, to the financial district in which it's seen. I think our cities need symbols, and these symbols help us to know where we are. We think of Paris, we think of the Eiffel Tower. It's this sort of ridiculous structure that serves no function, but it gave an identity. It gives an identity to Paris. So this moon serves, in a sense, to give an identity to your community, to the community of Riyadh. It's a symbol that when we think of the city, we think of the modern city, we think in terms of perhaps this sculpture that gives it, makes it a center And it's something that is can be understood or appreciated by anyone, whether it's a child or an older person, someone with knowledge of history or someone who has no knowledge of history. I think of the American author Gertrude Stein in the 1920s when a reporter asked her, said, Miss Stein, what do you think of modern art? She said, I'd like to look at it. It's something that invites us, our imagination, and it's full of meanings. I always say as an artist that our responsibility is to say, what is it? And not to say what something is. And if we go about it with a question, it will linger in your mind, and it's something you can continue to reflect on and think about. So we don't have a specific message, but it's something that is full of meanings. We can contemplate it through time. 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we can still be thinking about it. I was asked to show an example of one of my works and maybe to talk a little bit how I go about it. So in 1975 or late 1974, Michel Guy in France, who was at that time the Minister of Culture, commissioned me and later Philip Glass to make an opera for our time, a contemporary opera. And Phil and I decided to do an opera that we called Einstein on the Beach. The way I started is that I started with drawings. My mother said, Bob thinks by drawing. So I made a structure. It was something like this. It was in 4 acts. 1, 2, 3, 4, with A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. This was a classical structure. Can you see it? So it's in 4 acts with 3 themes, A, B, and C. And these 3 themes could reoccurred 3 times with variation. So I started 1A. This was in a proscenium stage, and I had a train that was going across the stage, and it was interrupted by a vertical line of light in the center of the stage. And the train disappeared, and the vertical line disappeared, and it appeared the second time, and again, the vertical line of light appeared once again. Einstein said, if you see a train going across a field, you will see that. But if you see it from above, you'll see a line. So the train disappeared and the vertical line disappeared. And a third time, the vertical line appeared. And then in the B scene, I started with a horizontal bar of light. And it became a courtyard and a window high up in the courtyard. And in the center was a large bed. I thought, there's another horizontal bar of light. I thought Einstein dared to be a dreamer. So I put the bed in the center of the courtyard. And I diagrammed the whole play very quickly, within a couple of hours. But I started with drawings of light from the very beginning. So light was architectural. It was integral to the whole. It wasn't something that was done at the last moment, but it was architectural. And I'll show you some images of the production. So I divided the space in 3 ways. Scenes that were very close to the audience, like this one. So if I see a close-up of my hand, I can say it's a portrait. If I see my hand a little further away, I can say it's a still life. But if I go across the street and see my hand, it's a part of a landscape. So the three traditional ways in which artists have measured space are portraits, images closer, still lifes, images further away, and landscapes. So these scenes in the beginning, I call them knee plays, like you have a knee and a leg. They were closer to the audience. They were portraits. This was the train going across the field in the B section. And here's the vertical line of light that interrupts the train. We're still in the A section. This is the train as it's further across the stage with a vertical line of light. Now this is in the B section where we have a horizontal bar of light, a window high up in a courtyard, and a bed for Einstein, the scientist who was a dreamer. A bed in the center of the stage, another horizontal bar of light. For me, time is a line that is vertical. It goes to the center of the earth and to the heavens. It's a vertical line. And space is a horizontal line. And it's this cross of time and space. It's the basic architecture of everything. It's how you play Mozart on a piano. Your finger goes down on a key and up and out on a string. And you can touch the key with an attack, or you can touch it gently. It's the tension between the vertical and the horizontal that makes the difference in the sound. So I often work in structuring with a vertical and a horizontal line. And this was interrupted then by another, what I call knee play, being closer to the audience. Einstein said if he had to live his life over, he'd rather be a plumber. So I built the furniture out of plumbing pipe. You can see the two chairs here built out of plumbing pipe. And this was what I call the field, the C section. It was the deepest space. And in the distance, we had a small spaceship. Next. And then we came back to the A theme, the train, but it was at a different time of day. It was at night, whereas the first train had been seen midday. The train's now seen from a different perspective. And then we're interrupted by an interlude scene, again, a knee play, something closer to the audience. So the scene before was the deep space, was a field. This was a small section, a panel from the spaceship that we'd seen high up in the air in the dance scene. Now we're at a close-up of this control room and a spaceship. Next. And then we go back to the courtroom, but half of it had disappeared and become a prison. And then we go back to the field section, the deep space with dancers. And the spaceship in the field section flying overhead, but it's a bit larger than when we first saw it, as if the spaceship were approaching. And then we go back to an interlude scene where we're closer again with the audience. And now we're in the A theme. We'd seen the train disappearing in the distance, but now it's a building, but the building occupies the same perspective as the train. So this piece, Einstein on the Beach, this opera, wasn't a narrative, didn't tell a story, but it was based on theme and variation. There's actually nothing very radical or new about it. It just didn't tell a narrative. But the structure, 4 acts and 3 themes, was a classical structure. It can be found in music, architecture, as a way of structuring ideas throughout time. Now we're in the B section, where we had the bed in the courtroom. But the only thing on stage was the bar of light, a horizontal bar of light that represented the bed for Einstein as a dreamer. And then this bed rose up and became a vertical line. No one was seen on stage, but just a bar of light. So see, once again, light was not something done in the final seconds, but it was an integral, active part of the whole. And then we had seen a small panel of the spaceship, the control room. Now we're in the interior of that spaceship for the landscape. So I introduced visual themes, the way a composer writes music or the way a choreographer makes dance. And for the final knee play interlude scene, instead of a little room in the corner of the stage, there was a bus. And the two characters we'd seen in the room are now waiting for a bus. So that was how I structured Einstein on the Beach. The visual book was not decoration, it was the book. It was the book of the opera. I've never been fond of schools of theater decoration. I think theater should be architectural, the way it was in the beginning. Light is the key. Start with light. It's what creates the space. If there are any questions or people want to make comments.
Thank you so much. Let's go to if there is any question.
Light is the challenge. Very early in my career, I directed Euripides' play Medea. So how to put light in this dark story, a mother who murders her two children. You have to think about it in multiple ways, but I always thought that I would have to do Medea if there was a child in the room and the child was about to go to bed, and you'd say, I'm going to tell you a dark story. So I thought of Medea as, in many ways, and thought she could be an angel of death, that every opposite needs its opposite, and it's usually portrayed in such a flat, obvious way. Heaven can't exist without hell, and hell doesn't exist without heaven. They're one world, not two.
I will thank you, Mr. Wilson. I would love to. I have maybe we'll wait for the question, but for now, maybe one of the questions that come to me when you talk about the classical building, or I like when you say it's an architect, not decoration. It's a building architect. For the Einstein in the Beach, the famous 76, the idea of an experimental or abstract. Did you describe it as a classical build, or because it's also the narrative and the abstract of the...
I myself, if I'm directing King Lear, if I'm directing Goethe's Faust, if I'm directing Wagner's Lohengrin, I simplify it for myself in something I can quickly understand something if I reduce it in a mathematical way. So, and usually, well, always, that reduction ends in I can code my thoughts quickly. Let's take King Lear of Shakespeare. Or I made a play that was 7 hours long, 12 hours long in 7 acts. Its structure is very close to Shakespeare. Let's say the play I made that was 12 hours long had 7 acts. So we have 7 acts, right? And I had 1 and 7 related, 2 and 6 related, 3 and 5 related, and 4
in
the middle. It was the turning point.
Yes.
All right. Think of King Lear. So you have in the beginning, the king divides his kingdom. The center line of Shakespeare's King Lear the king says, I shall go mad. And then he goes into nature. In the first half, he's in a man-made environment. In the second half, he's in nature. But the turning point is right in the center. Think of Wagner's Lohengrin. The center bar of music is when Klingsor throws the lance to Lohengrin and he grabs it and he says, time becomes space. Now the first half of Wagner's Lohengrin, Lohengrin is a white knight. In the second half, he is a black knight. But he turns it right in the center. It's a classical structure. And once I could see the whole quickly, it was much easier to begin to think about the parts. I thought of Goethe's Faust, this very complex, beautiful piece of literature that Goethe wrote. And it took me a long time to be able to see the whole quickly and simply. Goethe wrote a play about a man named Faust and the devil. I kept thinking towards the end, well, they were the same person. And that it's so curious that the first half of Goethe's Faust is a narrative. It tells a very clear story about a man making a deal and a pact with the devil. And the second half of Goethe's Faust is this long narrative poem that doesn't really follow a narrative. So suddenly you're in ancient Greece or you're somewhere else and you don't know how you got there. It's this long journey, non-narrative journey. And it's so curious that a playwright wrote something that was one half very narrative, telling a story, and another half that is not at all. And again, it was like Mephistopheles and Faust were two very different people, but yet I kept thinking that they were the same. And we think that 1 + 1 is 2. But actually, if you think about it, 2 is 1. So it just, this very simple, oversimplistic idea helped me to get the big picture of Goethe's Faust, looking at it simply mathematically in terms of numbers.
Well, mathematically and geometrically.
Yes. I mean, if we look at the Chinese architecture, if we look at Mayan architecture, we look at the Egyptian architect, we look at the Roman architect, they're all discerning the same mathematical patterns.
Yes.
And so man is always discerning the same math. Socrates said the baby is born knowing everything, but it's the uncovering of the knowledge that is the learning process. So in, I don't know, the 1970s or early 80s, Donald Judd, the American sculptor, put 100 stainless steel cubes in Marfa, Texas, in the desert. People were questioning, what is it? And I said at the time and wrote something that I thought 100 years from now, 200 years, perhaps 500 years from now, we'll still be looking at these 100 stainless steel cubes in the desert. They're classical. That cube, they were all exactly the same, is a classical form. And just like the pyramids in Egyptian pyramids or the Mayan pyramids, those are classical forms that today we still look at, have layers of meanings and functions, but it's a form that man is still discerning today and rediscovering. And we had to rediscover the classics of Donald Judd. I mean, there was nothing really radically new, but we had to discover it again. We're rediscovering who we're born knowing, as Socrates said.
All right, we have a few questions from our viewers. Laura asks, how did theater relate to your life before moving to New York?
Well, I didn't really know too much about theater before coming to New York, but I always thought theater is life. And the exciting thing to me, after leaving this small town of Waco, Texas, in central Texas, and I went to the University of Texas in Austin, Texas, there were 40,000 people on the campus. So there were people from India, there were people from Europe, there were people from different countries, and it was so theatrical to walk through the campus of the University of Campus to see the colors of the way people dress. And this was actually the beginning inspiration for my theater work. Later, when I came to New York, I was fascinated by the people I saw in subways, the people I saw on the street, and they became my performers. They were not trained people, but my first play was written with a 13-year-old deaf mute boy, Afro-American, who had never been to school. And I wrote a play that was 7 hours long and silent with him. I met him by accident on the street. My early works, I did a play that was 7 days long in Iran, in Shiraz. And my idea at that time was there shouldn't be so much difference between living life and being in theater. That you could always go to the theater the way you go to a park. And you can sit on a lunch break or in the evening when you finish work, or you can go early in the morning before you go to work. There would be always something going on, and I would just put a frame around life so that the still life with a frame around it was a real life.
All right, we have a question from Leanna. She is asked, how has the coronavirus pandemic changed your creative process?
It's hard to say that it's really changed. Someone asked Albert Einstein once, Mr. Einstein, can you repeat what you just said? He said, there's no need for me to repeat what I just said because it's all the same thought. So in a sense, I think an artist's body of work is always one thing. And we're always rediscovering what is within us, what we know. But I see my life, and it's been very different. It was very different when I was in Texas, very different when I came to New York. It's been very different when I worked in Iran or in Riyadh. But it's the same body of work. It's like a river that continues flowing. It's like a tree that grows, and sometimes it's in a storm. Sometimes it has no leaves. Sometimes it's green, sometimes it's brown, but it's the same tree.
Sarah has asked, Mr. Wilson, was there someone who inspired you in your use of light? And if so, could you speak a bit about them?
Well, I would say that very early on, I was very interested in the paintings of Cézanne and his use of light, Matisse as visual painters, later with certain architects, the way they use light, the Lord, what he gave us. I'm looking out my window right now, and I see a wire mesh wall and the sunlight hitting against it with a shadow from the opposing wall, and there's a beautiful 45-degree angle. I think I was always attracted to light, whether it's the light of nature or the light that man has made. Certainly in the early readings of Einstein, the way he talked about light had a profound influence on me.
Federico asks a question about architecture and your theater. Could you elaborate more on which aspects of architecture attract you the most?
Well, architecture is about lines. Architecture is about many things, but let's say, if we want to say it's about lines, there are only two lines in the world. There's a straight line and a curved line. That's all. So if you're designing a building, do you want 100 straight lines and one curved line? Do you want to have many curved lines? Classical architecture is buildings and trees. So you take a building, and in front of this building, you put a tree. That's classical architecture. The tree helps you see the building, and the building helps you see a tree. You can have two trees. So this is Greek architecture, a protagonist and an antagonist and a chorus. All right, it's classical Western ballet. You have a prima ballerina and a corps de ballet. Well, I think that it's a way to structure your space, and the simpler you can think about it. Architecture is, let's say, about a building. This is the building. And then once you have a building, you can live in the building and fill your apartment that way. I'll fill mine this way. Someone else is going to fill it that way, and someone else does it like this. So we all fill megastructure in whatever way we want. But what gives cohesion is the megastructure. So in theater, get your megastructure. Get your overall picture, make it simple, and then you can fill it in multiple ways. That's how a director makes a play. You start with some sort of frame, and then you begin to fill it in. Now, the frame is not so important, but without the frame, I don't know what to do. It's how you fill in the frame. That's what's important. So you can see 100 girls dance Swan Lake. But why is there one that's the most beautiful? It's how she feels in the form. All the girls are doing the same step and have been doing it, since the 19th century. It's how you feel in the form. That ultimately is what's important. But without the form, I don't know where to go or what to do.
Speaking of your creative process, Paula asks about your creativity, asking, are you more creative during the daytime or during the nighttime?
I don't think about whether I'm creating. It's not like I wake up in the morning and I get dressed and I go to an office and I do the work and then I go home and I scratch the dog and I watch television. I'm always thinking creatively. That I don't, there's no time. I mean, I wake up in the morning, I'm thinking about something. I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm thinking about something. Whether it's wherever I am, is the creative process is always going on.
JB asks, could you speak more about the inspiration for Daydream, the installation of the moon in the financial district?
Well, I wanted to do something about light and the many different surfaces of light and how it can mirror itself, mirror us, can mirror the world. It's you can dream as you're walking in a courtyard. You can dream where you're home thinking about it. It's a reflector of life. It's very curious that We are born as babies, they say, with our eyes closed. And the eyelid is moving rapidly. And this is a sign of dreaming. And the baby, even before being born, is seen with his eyes moving rapidly, which is a dream state of mind. What is the baby dreaming?
Julia asks Mr. Wilson, which composer would you have liked to collaborate with, a composer of the past?
I've been fortunate to work with many composers. I did an opera very early in my career with Marc Anthony Charpentier. I did with Mozart this past year. I've worked with Wagner. I've worked with composers ancient, from Haydn to contemporary composers. I've worked with Lou Reed, I've worked with Philip Glass, I've worked with Tom Waits. So my work is different depending on with whom I collaborate with or the composer. So if I have Verdi, it's one thing. But if I have Lou Reed, that's another. If I have Luigi Nono, that's another. Nono is about the quietness of sound. Lou Reed's about the loudness of sound. And hearing the music of Lou Reed and being in that world of this loud sound helps me to appreciate the quietness of Luigi Nono's Prometeo. So I've been fortunate in my life and my career to work with many different composers, living and ones from the past. And my work is different, what I do personally, because of this collaboration with these different men of music. Or women. I just did a few years ago a whole series of works with Lady Gaga.
Stefano is asking, were you afraid of the darkness as a kid? And can you speak more about your childhood?
I was terrified of the darkness as a child, and I still am afraid of the dark. I always leave a light on someplace that it's something I don't understand and something other people have tried to help me overcome, but I do have this phobia for darkness. Maybe that's why one of my signatures for my work in the theater or exhibitions is always the light.
Federico asks, stating that in Italy today they are celebrating Dante Alighieri. Could you speak a bit more about your Inferno?
Well, I don't know so much about what I will do for the Inferno. It's just in a very beginning stage. I did make a draft, a very quick draft of a numerical structure, and I haven't begun to fill in that structure, and I'm not sure exactly what the content will be or how to go about it. So it's in formation, and I'm working on it. We'll have to wait and see.
Thank you for our audience who join us our talk tonight, A Journey to Light and Darkness. A special thanks goes to our guest, Mr. Robert Wilson, who attended and who really shared with us in his journey about his work, his source of inspiration, and all of the knowledge. Thank you so much for you all. See you at the next Noor Talk, and good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.